Hey everyone, I'm Ben Levi. Welcome back to Language Sofa Podcast. Right, so today we have a very special guest who probably needs no introduction if you're an MFL teacher. I'm talking about the one and only Dr Gianfranco Conti. Gianfranco is a huge name in language education, not just here in the UK, but all over the world. If you've ever used EPI methods in your classroom, or even just heard the name, you'll know exactly why I'm so excited to have him here today. So the co-author of Language Teacher Toolkit, Breaking the Sound Barrier, Memory, which are all books I've read and really inspired my teaching, and of course the Sentence Builders book series. He's been the winner of the 2015 TESS Best Resource Contributor Award, founder and CEO of LanguageGym.com, and co-founder of SentenceBuilders.com, and of course the creator of the incredible EPI approach. Gianfranco, welcome to Language Sofa.
Thank you for inviting me, mate. I'm really pleased because we need more podcasts like yours at the moment. Either you got this podcast run by people who are not really or have not been in education for a long time, like practicing teachers for a long time, or people who live in realities which most teachers in state schools in the UK or elsewhere can't relate to. I mean, it's a very good thing that you're doing, giving your free time up to share good practice and invite people, to talk about important issues in the MFL world.
That's great. I appreciate it. I mean, this is something, I'm in the thick of it. I'm teaching here every day. So I want to kind of give across that experience as well of what it's like to be on the ground, and also putting in place lots of the methodology and stuff around MFL, but in a real situation.
To be honest, having been to your school and having seen the good work you've done there, it's great to see that, the kind of setting you're working at is very similar to many of the settings that I visit, when I'm on my speaking tours, comprehensive schools, highly inclusive, the pressure we get from the various corners that you, in your capacity, would have to, of course, face day in, day out, being the discipline, being kids from a lower socioeconomic status, being pressure from the examination boards and all the rest. So, you're representative of a lot of the teachers who possibly listening to this podcast. And this is a very important thing. Very important thing.
No, that's great. Thank you. So, Jan, of course, if you're an MFL teacher, it's known the amazing impact that your methodology is having in the world of language teaching. So in the UK, and obviously beyond that as well. So we'll obviously get to where you are and your language influence is at now. But what I'd really like to know is, where did this all begin? What was your journey into the world of languages?
Yeah, it all started back. I'm going to cut the long story short because I don't want to bore people with too many details of my biography. But I think the most important part of it, definitely when I started get an interest in language as a very, very young boy. It's really weird. It was like an obsession. Like I would go to the local library when I was literally like in my early teens and just to borrow books, and then I started to notice some books were more effective than others. And as young as 14 or 15, I started to create my own worksheets to learn from the various books. And then it became an obsession to create materials. It was really weird. It was like, I have ADHD, yet when somebody gave me something like that to do, or when I gave myself something like that to do, I would just be immersed and hyper-focused. And that's when my passion for resources really started, when I was starting to...
So whatever you were given, you kind of created your own way of doing it as well, which actually suited to you. So you were thinking that way from quite a young age then.
Yeah, weirdly, and until you asked me this question, I never thought about that. When you sent me the question the other day, I said, this is a question I'd like to ask you. I thought, oh my word, I never talked about that to anyone. I always start from the TS. But anyway, fast forward many years, I was teaching at the University of Reading. I was teaching Italian, and I remember photocopying worksheets. And then there was this student. I wish I remember her name. She was just came into the photocopying room. I don't know what she was looking for, and she said, "Dr. Conti, you know something? Yeah, you're destined to greater things." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, this things, these booklets that you gave us, these worksheets, are really brilliant, and they're good fun, and you should publish them." And then, of course, I never did until one day I was in Kuala Lumpur many years later, and I remember putting all the worksheets I had on the TS. And then I think 3 or 4 days later, I received a phone call from somebody in England, because I was in Malaysia at that time, and said, "Gianfranco, do you realize that your picture is on the front, on the landing page of the TS as best contributor?" And I was like, "What?"
Nice.
And then I looked, and my face was actually there, because of course in those days, the more worksheets you uploaded, the more your face was going to be likely to be there. It wasn't about quality, actually. It was about quantity, So just to tell you the sheer amount of worksheets that had accumulated over the years that I never, ever, ever published. And then when I started to share them, they started to go, especially the Spanish revision quickie, French revision quickies, where went really viral, and then I was nominated for the award. But EPI started much earlier, started in very challenging schools back in England, where I needed to ensure that students who were not engaged would be engaged. And the first thing that I noticed when I landed a job in Reading, in one of those schools, and previously, to be honest, during my teacher training, is that all the things that I learned in the books on my master's about language acquisition, instructive language acquisition, were completely flouted by the books and by those who were training me. So I was actually finding this crazy gap between what I'd been taught on my TEFL training, teaching as a foreign language training, and on my master's as compared to what I saw done in the schools. And I thought, okay, it's all very well to implement this in my worksheets, but it needs to be implemented in the classroom too. And of course, when you implement in the classroom as a rookie, I was just arrived in very little experience of teaching in England. You get head of department or senior colleagues going, no, that's the way we do it. No, we use this PowerPoint. Oh, no, we use the textbook.
Yeah, very, very common thing. Very common thing.
Yeah. And you know what? A lot of teacher trainees or ECTs that I meet who have read my books or other books of other researchers, they all find the same thing. They find some schools that are quite open to research, and others that just say, no, just this is the textbook, you're taking over my class. And I understand why, fair enough. That's the way we do things here, and that's it. And it's interesting, the other day I met somebody, and this happens in every workshop that I run. I met somebody from a university who had done the first teaching practice in a school using EPI, and she was doing a lot of listening, a lot of mini whiteboard games, a lot of gamification. She had a clear structure to the teaching, the Marsia sequence. And then when they went to the new school, this wasn't happening anymore, and she was actively looking for a job in a school that would do EPI purely because of the interactive side of it, the fun side of it.
So that's interesting, because obviously, like I've recently been through that same sort of thing, and having to implement that in a new school, but I just think it's so noticeable what I've seen from teaching using EPI is it's so accessible for all students, but also it stretches higher ability students, but also it helps students feel success as well, which I think is really key because of
you just reminded me of an email I received yesterday. I'm not sure I'm at liberty to read it, but I will kind of paraphrase some of it. It's from somebody, a teacher, who contacted me a while ago. She wanted to know about the schemes of learning embedded in the trilogy, right? And then she said something really, really, really cool, that she had just been through a mock STED. It was really cool. You'd be a mock STED by some renowned teacher trainer, and who's going around the school in the area to do mock STED. And what's really interesting, she said, she was a fan of the Conti style pedagogy, but listen, this is the fun bit. She said she's not sure she likes it.
Don't want to commit yet.
But it gets good results. So she says, we currently have a value added of, I won't tell you because otherwise it might identify the school. And I think a part of our success is using methodology. She's coming back in 2 months, and one of our targets is to look more into Conti.
Wow, there you go.
Which is good, as now it may be that SLT will pay for CPD.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting because this teacher trainer actually is saying, is giving them as a target to develop the Conti methodology further, which a few years ago might have not been the case because I was seen a bit as a sort of a black sheep, the anti.
Yeah, that's right, the dark side,
Yeah, the anti-establishment, Helen Myers or Rachel Hawkes, all the established people who have always run MFL in an almost unquestioned kind of way. And then suddenly this guy comes along and says the opposite to what they say. And
but you know what? If people continue doing what they've always done, you're going to get the same results. There is that to it. So I think results speak for themselves. But also, even at Key Stage 3, the success that I see students getting is unbelievable, and that is spreading. Like you said, lots and lots of people are getting onto it now, or thinking about using it, or elements of it, even if they don't want to fully admit they're using EPI. When you look at what they're actually teaching, quite often, in fact, they are, so.
Yeah, to be fair on a lot of teachers, I was a bit of a nutcase in a way when it came to teaching, because I remember I would come back home, and even when I was married, so with a very young child, I remember I would spend 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, I'm not kidding you, up to midnight, sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning, preparing resources because I felt so outraged by how inadequate the textbook was that I just couldn't. So I remember having this friend over from Poland, a really lovely girl that I used to really be fond of, and this poor girl would come over expecting to spend a lot of time with me, and I was like in front of the computer producing resources because I was teaching in very difficult schools, and I knew that if I put the textbook, the stuff of the textbook on a PowerPoint, or simply photocopied it or used it with those students, there was no way I would engage them. There was no way. So it was actually a matter of survival, because you can't have the cake and eat it. You can't say, all right, I want to use the textbook or some random resource from the TS that looks good, but then expect the students to actually respond to it in a way that is going to lead to them being focused, engaged, retaining things, having loads and loads and loads of repetition of that stuff. Because, of course, the textbook won't do it, and the random worksheet from TS, however beautiful and well done it is, it will never suit what you're planning to do 100%, unless, of course, it is a series of worksheets like a booklet, and you stick to it, and it's fun and it's engaging. And I'm sure there is some stuff on the TS, but most of the time it isn't the case. So I remember that I used to spend so many hours on creating the resources, and that's why, as I mentioned to you earlier, when then time came that I decided to upload things on the TS, I think I had something like 500, 600 worksheets that I upload and PowerPoints that I uploaded at once.
Yeah. I think the thing I find interesting as well, based on that, is what you say about not being entirely reliant on like a resource or a worksheet. The thing you said in one of your workshops about how important it is for the teacher to use their voice in a way that they're almost like the parental voice, I think you put it.
That's
So
right.
it's so important, that input, and that changed a lot of my thinking on that, like how important the input is at the start of the Mars ears cycle, and how to model, and how important that stage is, and not to be afraid of you being the main voice to them, because that's actually what children are used to anyway. I think that's a really interesting point.
Exactly. I noticed that when I started to teach, especially when I started to teach listening, I mean, and this is what, to be fair on MFL, this is what happened also in the TFL world. When I started when I was trained on my CELTA course many years ago, we're talking about maybe 40 years ago, 37 years ago, I remember being taught the same thing that I was taught in my PGCE, that you're supposed to use flashcards, which is not a bad idea because it still gets some input, and then go straight into this listening, the audio tracks. So, it's so embedded in the way we were taught as well that you can't blame teachers. But then many people like yourselves, when they start becoming the main providers of input and you become the sort of nurturer, like you said, the parental voice, the rapport changes, because it's not just about learning. It's the rapport that changes. Imagine the difference between being the person who just presses the button and looks around to sort of understand who's getting it and who isn't. And often a lot of people don't get it, and you need to do all sort of things to try and make sure they don't switch off. And instead, that person who is constantly investing in the students' participation, because it's a constant ping pong, isn't it? It's a constant filling the room with sound, getting these many whiteboards turning, then showing, like you can see the light bulb moments on, and
also
the faces.
it's that real interaction, isn't it? It's that's what a real interaction is, a conversation between two people. And I think seeing a teacher doing that, I think it makes it real for them. I think that's actually a really important thing as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, TPRS, talking about somebody who does podcaster too, TPRS is not bad in that respect, because it also is also a dialogue between two sets of, between teachers and students. Problem is, though, that there is usually this storytelling thing going on, which you can do every now and then. I don't mind. I myself do some storytelling with the students in sort of TPRS way once a month or half term. But to do that every day, it doesn't necessarily tally with what the curriculum requirements are, what kind of the range of skills you need to cover, because it's mostly storytelling, isn't it? So there's always so much you can embed of what students need to learn. And the good thing about EPI is a bit of a compromise, because, as I often say, is not a method, it's an approach. So you can you can adapt it to your context, you can adapt it to your curriculum, and virtually anything can be taught through that, and you will still have lots of vocabulary learning and lots of grammar learning, which converges with the curriculum in the UK. England, Scotland, Ireland, because it's very popular in all of these places. So some people heard me criticize TPRS before. I don't criticize it as a method, because it has its merits. It's an interaction, so it's good. But we need to also be realistic in terms of the context which do it. In many classrooms in the UK, you can't do that sort of stuff. And of course, the other big issue is that you can't teach everything through stories. At least not. Although I guess with ChatGPT nowadays, you could create a story just using the vocabulary in the GCSE specification. But
it's great. Yeah, it's kind of it becomes too vague, doesn't it?
That's right.
But yeah, no, so that's great. No, very, very interesting. So one thing I did want to ask you, I found really interesting when you spoke before. I remember you telling me about how you linked the EPI approach to kind of your experience in sport. And I think this is where probably how I kind of really attached to it to begin with, because with my sporting background and my sports coaching background, the micro skills and things like that you said about, would you be able to tell me a bit about that, how you link that to your PE background? And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the interesting things about sports is that the more you practice sports, the more you realize that of the people around you who play with you, who or against you in whether tennis or football, you find the naturals and you find those who really need to work hard at it. Yeah,
sure.
I don't know if it's been your experience as well.
For sure, definitely.
Yeah. So you got a lot of people, that you can just put them in the street and give them a football, and they will shine regardless. They will just come up with the most incredible acrobatics,
natural ability. Yeah.
And then you have the vast majority of the people who might be between the okay to actually I'm stuck where I was when I started playing in the streets, 2, 3, 4 years on. And these are be the kids who will never get picked, right? By whoever makes the teams. And this is this analogy fits very much the typical language classrooms. You find the really talented kids, right, who don't need any motivation, who just listen, ask questions, look for answers themselves, notice new linguistic features, and these kids can progress often even without you being there to support them. Yeah. And then you have the vast majority of the kids who are either somewhere like halfway or linger in the kind of, sort of below average kind of zone. And they're quite happy to stay there because language is languages. They've got other more important things to think about. So when you look at this sort of scenario, and then you realize that maybe just like happens in sport, where a lot of parents nowadays, I don't know if it's your experience, but a lot more parents now send the kids to football schools, right? I mean, when I was younger, it didn't happen, very rarely. Nowadays they do, partly because they want everyone to become David Beckham or Lionel Messi. They want to, invest in their kids' future. But partly because they realize one thing, that maybe it's not enough to just throw the kids on a football field and just hope for the best.
Yeah.
And guess who does that? A lot of us teachers. We just play the audio track.
Throw them in and hope for the best.
Yeah, with little preparation, the kids approach a text. Very often it's not even highly comprehensible input. And of course, a lot of them struggle because they're not being taught how to listen in a systematic, deliberate, and cognizant way. And same thing with football. So now that we know, because there's been extensive research by Professor John Field and many others researchers across all 4 language skills, we know what the micro skills of listening, reading, speaking, and writing are. Then it makes sense, just like you would do as a football coach. Not just say, okay, go and play football and learn how to do it. But actually, as a near exact science, because it's not an exact science yet, targeting specific skills so that the students, when they listen to input coming from the teacher, so highly comprehensible, uttered in a very student-friendly way, with the sounds beautifully emphasized where they need to be. Mi madre es muy alta. mi padre es muy alto, so what we call input enhancement. How about getting the student to train them in the micro skills of listening? So listening out for sounds, listening out for syllables, distinguishing where words begin and end, looking at recognizing vocabulary, recognizing grammar features. So EPI basically starts from this premise that there are micro skills that can be taught and should be taught, very much like you do in sports.
Exactly. So from my tennis background, I would think, say I'm teaching a forehand, for example, I wouldn't just go over there, try your best, and see what happens. Like you said, a very small percentage would be able to just see it happening and be able to replicate it. But breaking it down into those small skills is exactly what you have to do. But also, along the way, that they feel success and they see it working. They see you showing good examples through modelling and they have that embedded over time before they're even expected to do it. It's all very, very linked, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give an example. My mother was a tennis player, semi-professional, right? And I remember how many times when I was little, she had to show me how to serve before I could actually do it.
Yeah.
And that is very important because she was very smart and she understood me. I'm not actually a fast learner. My brother is, for instance, I'm not. So she showed me from different angles. She showed it slowly. She showed how to lift the arm, what to do with the rest of the body several times because she knew that I was less confident, for instance, than my brother. And by the same token, imagine if somebody just said, okay, look at me. Okay, look at me. Okay, now just do it. Right?
Yeah.
And when you think about it, this happens very much. I mean, that's the way I was trained to use flashcards. I would say,
sure.
Mon frère, répétez.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are coaches out there and teachers out there who probably, get caught up in that, don't they? But it's weird that you say it's actually a parental instinct that a lot of us teachers are parents, but we probably do those things with our own children. But when it comes to the classroom, sometimes we forget about those many steps along the way. So I think we need to bring that into the classroom a little bit as well.
You just reminded me of something really, really interesting. I don't know how this happened, but there was a very intelligent, very smart teacher from an independent school, right? And a bit like a lot of these people who do podcasts, like that guy from Switzerland, what's his name? Liam Printer, the Irish guy.
Mm-hmm.
These are people who absolutely they're very good in their context. I'm sure they're fantastic teachers. They motivate their kids in their classroom beautifully, but they forget that they are in independent schools. I visit independent schools all the time, and on a Tuesday I might be in a poshest independent schools in the world, in Australia or Africa or in England or elsewhere. The next day I'm in a round down, very, very, very challenging school somewhere in the northeast of England or near London or Manchester, Salford, very difficult environments. And I can tell you that I taught in both systems. And very often, just like like you said, we forget that it's all about empathy with your learners, right? Understanding who your kids are. Just like the parent understand the kids very well. You understand the kids that you teach. Mm-hmm. Often though, you need to understand also that the context in which you teach is very, very different from the context in which a state school would teach.
Yeah,
so
sure.
This person in this workshop was puzzled by some of the things I said about how challenging listening was, because his words, not mine, he said, oh, but I love doing detective work when I listen, and my students do too. And I said, yeah, I can see how in your school, a typical year 10 will love to be challenged by highly incomprehensible input and to look for Latinate words and all that. Absolutely, no problem. I can tell you though, in schools where there's a lot of premium pupils, and a lot of less fortunate kids, much less motivated, with discipline is a big issue. You might want to start with comprehensible input first, and maybe the long game is to getting them to more challenging text. And that's why I'm so happy that you and William Marks, another lad that I respect a lot, teaching a state school or doing this kind of podcasts, because as I said, teaching in an international school where I used to teach, or in a private school, is challenging. It's got loads of different challenges, but we need to remember that the reality is that most kids in state school in England find it very hard to do well in listening. Even at speaking and writing, to be honest with you, reading seems to be a bit easier.
Yeah. It's about making it relevant, isn't it? It's about making what they're learning about relevant, and obviously linking it to GCSE stuff, but making it stuff that they can actually relate to. There's no point in talking about things that are completely abstract to them. Maybe to broaden their horizons, but realistically for them to engage with it and connect with it, it's you're putting a big barrier up there, aren't you? Really.
It's very important, because relatability and relevance refer also to academic standards, right? And we need to understand that at the end of the day, in many state schools, you don't have kids who are as academic as kids in, who come from upper middle class, who had basically everything served onto them on a silver platter. You'll have kids, in state schools, and you've taught in those kinds of environments, where you cannot even take the spelling of English words correctly, right?
That's right. So it's, relevance, isn't it? Thank you for that. So, talking about the different levels of, levels of school and different things like that within the UK, what would you say is the current state of language learning, or what would you say could still be done?
What I noticed, first let's start with the positives. I noticed people who, more and more people who are trying to break away from the textbook. And this is very positive, because at the end of the day, we know from research that relevance, engagement, and self-efficacy, can-do attitude, are the most potent drivers of student motivation. So if you want to have a decent GCSE uptake, you need to factor in a convergence of these three different factors. If you don't have that, and of course, in textbooks, it can't happen. There's no way that the average student in England will find textbooks enjoyable, because there's hardly any gamification there. It's difficult that a student will develop self-efficacy unless they have a teacher who adapts the textbooks heavily and find ways to scaffold the transition from listening to speaking and writing in a way which is accessible, because that's a big problem with textbooks. In a two-side spread, they teach basically a subunit, right? Just to give an example, one of the language books would have something like 24 activities, taking the student from the sentence builder to writing. In typical textbook, you're lucky if you have 6, right? And of course, the big issue is that the listening is very little. Speaking, again, is very little. So I'm in awe of these teachers who actually have broken away massively from the traditional textbook. And this is happening a lot. What is also very positive is that even though a lot of people are not using EPI, they're using a lot of the ideas of the techniques, which is great, because and not just EPI, but activities which are based, for instance, on what now is becoming more and more in use in classrooms, which is listening for learning, listening to learn. A lot of teachers are doing things like, faulty echo, spot the intruder, spot the nonsense, or
great activities. I use them all the time. Yeah.
So even if they're not using EPI, they're using at least my listening to learn activities, because breaking the sound barrier, I might say, has been read by a lot of teachers, even those who don't use EPI. And that's very important, because the book is based on John Field's work, a famous researcher, his research, for some weird reason, is not divulged by teacher trainers in Britain. Only a few are doing that. And it's such a shame, because it's such important research. On another positive side, what I see is a lot of teachers who are willing to do CPD. There's much more CPD available. You will notice that since COVID, there's much more professional development, and you can see that finally teachers that for years, decades, were starved of language-specific CPD, now suddenly they have quite a lot, like the one that you offer, for instance, in the recent event, the ones that are offered by different podcasts, the ones that are offered by individuals who used to be associated with me, and now they are doing similar things. It's basically EPI in disguise. And also you find associations now that are doing, organizations that are doing more research-based MFL CPD. So this is a very good development. What is less good about this is some of these people are not very credible, but that's another issue.
Yeah, obviously CPD, it's great that there's more CPD, but it has got to be relevant, has it? It's got to be, you don't want people just throwing out CPD left, right and centre if it's actually, it can be slightly damaging if they're spreading slightly the wrong things but yeah, I guess it's moving in the right direction in terms of that, I suppose.
I can tell you that there are some really great people out there, but there's also a lot of imposters, people who honestly, I read the blogs and I go like, really? It's completely made up stuff, that it got nothing to do with research. And it's okay when people just write, their opinion, because it doesn't have to be based in research. But in some cases, really complete misrepresentation of research.
Yeah.
And that could be an issue.
And especially for new teachers who are looking for, looking for the right ideas that can obviously send them in the wrong direction right from the off, can't it? So
yeah, also because sometimes these are people are very vocal on Twitter or now on Blue Sky, and honestly, I mean, the other day I read something. What was it? Passive receptive skills. Passive retrieval practice, or in another blog I read the phonics theory of self-efficacy. What the hell is that? That's just completely made up stuff. And the problem is that then some teachers might think, oh, big names, or Now, on the negative side, every single time I go to a school, one of the first questions I ask is, what is the minimum threshold of comprehensible input?
I thought you were going to say the meaning of life then. I was panicking.
Yeah. I think for a teacher is an existential issue, this, because everything, like you said in a recent post that I read, everything that you do in a classroom starts with loads of quality and highly comprehensible input, right? It all starts from there. Yeah, so if it all starts from there, the logical question is, so what is the minimum threshold of comprehensibility in the text? Because if the kids don't get it, they're gonna kick off. I mean, honestly, they're just gonna kick off.
Inaccessible,
So when I said to you earlier, you can't have the cake and eat it. Okay, you want to use the textbook, you want to use the stuff on Active Learn, Active Hub, whatever you call it, go for it. Will the students understand it 95 or 98% of it? And the answer is no, unless they use Google Translate or some other app. No. So they eventually will lose interest and will kick off. They won't learn anything from it. And that's the most important question I usually ask me in my workshop, is the first question I ask. And you'll be surprised to know, Ben, you know the answer, of course. I just said 95% to 98% comprehensible input is the minimum. You'll be surprised how many people write 20% or 30% or 50%. But 20% has been a common answer by many people.
That's interesting as well. And then we kind of wonder why there isn't the uptake, or students don't carry on with languages because we're throwing them too far in the deep end. We have to challenge them, but to that extent, obviously they're just not going to access the work. It's that we're putting them off the language by doing that, aren't we? Really.
That's right. The other thing which is quite negative is that a lot of people are approaching the new GCSE in the wrong way. They are sticking to the words on that list and on that list only. And they're doing death by Quizlets or retrieval practice because some pseudo guru in one of those ALL events or whatever they are told them that that's the way to do it. And it's absolutely ridiculous. You can't stick just to 1,200 words or 1,700 words for higher because it's too reductive. You need to make sure that the students have a wide-ranging vocab. Not super wide, but wide enough to be able to talk about a bloody theme. Not just 4 or 5 adjectives and 4 or 5 words taken from some corpus or some corpora, which is largely based on articles and written stuff. Because if you want to teach kids what people actually say in France, Spain, Germany, Italy, in their daily life, not just what people write in books, articles, or in the proceedings of the European Union Parliament. So the most important thing is to actually forget about those lists to a degree. Don't just stick to them in a pedantic kind of way.
Yeah.
Do include those words. Do make sure you include those words. But I'll tell you a secret, Ben. I have never studied any of the examination board's specs until I became a CPD provider. Would you believe it? As a teacher, I've always thought, most important thing, I want to make sure my kids enjoy the lessons. They come out of it having learned what I set out to teach them. They become great listeners and speakers, and also decent readers and writers. Yeah. But most of my lessons need to be about interaction. The kids need to get out of the classroom energized, enthused. And if I'm dealing with low ability kids, they need to know that languages can be learned even if you're low ability. I've always loved teaching bottom set. Yeah. Bottom set in many schools are the sync sets. I love the bottom sets because with the bottom sets, you can actually have more fun than with sometimes the top sets, because they're just, I find that they're more amenable to do the kind of stuff that I like to do.
And they don't expect to do, and when they do, they're so happy to be able to succeed it. They almost can't believe it. And I think, you know what, as well, going back to what you're saying about the cramming in the stuff for GCSE, what I find quite often happens is a lack of focus on actually embedding stuff over Key Stage 3, which is why I find this EPI approach so beneficial, because you embed it so much over Key Stage 3. When you get to Key Stage 4, this really solid foundations there, and you're just building on each bit. You're not going, right, oh God, here's the big list of words we now need to try and get in. They've already embedded it. So I think that's why that helps so much. I think that's neglected sometimes.
To be fair on EPI, we always said from the very beginning, from 20 years ago when I started using this approach, use high frequency words anyway in those sentence builders. But together with the high frequency words, you need to include the non-frequency word, because I want to say that I like cheese, for God's sake. I want to say I like ham. I want to say I like jam. I want to say that I like seafood.
Yeah.
You know,
it's a life skill. It's emphasizing that, isn't it? You know, it's 50% for the exam or whatever percentage, you know, but it is a life skill. Ultimately, going beyond GCSE, you want to be able to use it in the real world. That is actually the main purpose, arguably, you know.
Exactly. And, you know, there is a danger with death by Quizlet, booklet, or even Language Gym. If you just use the Language Gym as centersbuilt.com to teach vocabulary, that at the end of the day, the brain has a very limited ability to transfer, right? Yeah. Very limited ability to transfer. When you're a beginner and you always learned how to drive in a Cinquecento or in a whatever car, it's harder than to move to a Porsche, right?
Yeah, I haven't had to experience that problem yet.
To drive an SUV, right? You know, I remember some of my friends, you know, who just would be, to them, renting out a car that was different from the car they drive at home.
Yeah.
And go on the highway. So the brain is the same. It's like I play tennis very well, hence I can play badminton. No, the racket is very similar, but no. And the same thing happens with the brain when you learn vocabulary. If you learn vocabulary through Quizlet, that's not the same thing as listening to an oral text under exam conditions in the exam. So the mistake that a lot of people see is they see grammar and vocabulary learning as a fifth and sixth skill. They don't understand that actually it needs to be woven into the listening, reading, speaking and writing sequence, input to output. It's not something that you learn on a Quizlet and maybe you recognize later on in the listening and reading. No, you're learning through the listening, reading, and through the speaking and the writing activities as part of the crescendo that goes from input, the modeling, the input processing, and then gradually writing and speaking in that order. Mm-hmm. And the problem is that now a lot of people, I remember this individual telling me, a very lovely teacher that I met recently, and she said, man, basically, we cannot use your books. We want to use Trilogy. The three of us are wanting to use Trilogy, but the head of the department has created a set of Quizlet for every single, I don't know, area of theme or sub-theme, yeah, you know, and that specification. And so we need to match those sets.
Yeah. Gosh.
Yeah. I wonder what the kids are going to say when they need to describe a picture or say something about themselves, which is on those lists. What they're going to do?
You become fully reliant on that, don't you? That becomes your way of learning, unfortunately. So you become restricted, don't you, I suppose?
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating. I think that's given us a good outline of the state of languages in the UK. I think that's very accurate and very real to what's happening.
This has been part 1 of this episode. Make sure you tune in for part 2.